Which other language do you speak? English, French? Do you speak French?
So it's a really good question. I think I only speak French and English at the end of the day. When I was in school, I took Spanish. And there was a moment in my life where I was reasonably well-versed in Spanish.
Yes.
And I can't say that I know Spanish.
Do you understand?
I do.
Si hablo español.
Sí.
Quiero una cerveza.
Yes, that too, but a little later. Good testing.
Apollonia Poilâne is part of the third generation of bakers in the Poilâne family.
Author and CEO, Apollonia had to take over the Poilâne empire at the age of 18 after an unexpected situation.
Since taking over, she had succeeded in transforming a bakery full of history into the most famous bakery in France.
Today, they have 5 stores throughout Paris.
And now we'll dive into the story of Poilâne, the artwork made out of bread by Dali,
and how she managed to take over an empire while studying at Harvard.
This is the Gluten Podcast, with you, Apollonia Poilâne.
¿Cuál es tu pan favorito?
Good question.
You understood?
I did understand. I did understand. So I honestly think that the bread that I prefer depends on what I put with it or the moment I eat it with. Because like in the mornings, I want to have something that's like nice and will start my day, fill in my stomach, and then I can go and run around the world. And then, maybe later in the evening, I want something lighter. But it's also nice to have a little slice of brioche that's well baked and toasted in the morning.
Tartine.
So a tartine.
Now I understood.
So I like to have a little bit of a sommelier's approach to bread baking and to bread tasting. And I'm going to sound pompous for a second, but the thing is, certain ingredients, certain foods suit better certain grains. And I think that if you're going to go at length of having a nice quality bread, why not go that extra step and just choose the right grain? So, of course, there's the moment of the day and what you're looking for. So if it's the mornings and I have a long day ahead, I will want to have a bread that's going to really feed me and carry me through lunch. And if I've had a really lazy morning and it's almost noon and I need to have a quick bite before I have lunch, then maybe just a slight toast of brioche and just that simple tartine, a thick slice of brioche toasted on either side so that it's nice and golden on the outside and nice and moist from the butter on the inside. That's also quite divine.
Put some more butter on top.
That is discretionary. Let's just say I've done it a few times.
And speaking about bread, what is a miche and what is a signature bread from Poilâne?
That is a very good question. So, if you ask a French person what is a miche, you might have one of 3 answers.
Okay.
The official baker's answer is that a miche is a loaf of bread. So typically a big round piece of bread.
It's like a boule.
A boule. Or sometimes they will call it un pan de campagne or...
country bread.
Yeah.
O pan de campo in español.
But actually, it's funny because miche in French also can be a derogatory term to say breasts or ass.
Ah, yeah.
So you have to be careful in what context to use those words.
But it's the same, in the same accentuation or sound the same.
Exactly the same word, les miches.
Les miches.
So
Okay.
be wary of that when you talk about someone's miche. A miche is this big, at Poilâne, big sourdough bread that I like to describe as a big hug of bread because when you put your hands in front of you and extend them to create a circle, you have just about the volume of what a loaf of bread is. And it's the promise of something you can share, something that you can keep, something that has flavor. And that's all of the things that this piece of bread carries and that I love.
Because this miche, it's you sell it by half or by the slice too?
Yeah, you sell it by the slice. So this is something that's distinctive about Poilâne is that we offer to sell the bread by the slice. So if you just want 2 slices with a little piece of cheese that you've just bought, then you can come for a picnic quickly, or else you're greeting your family and you take a big boule at home and you have the loaf, and then you might have some leftovers for your next morning's breakfast.
And it's an excellent, because the slice is huge.
Yes.
So really huge. You can make 3 slices out of one.
Probably.
And the good thing about this kind of bowl,
Yeah.
now this big bowl, is that it lasts longer, but it depends on how fast you eat. But I think
Exactly. No, exactly.
because of sourdough and the humidity, right?
And the volume as well,
The volume.
because it creates, for the bigger the piece of bread, the more time it takes for air to dry out to the crumb.
Yes.
So it has, by its size, more resilience than other breads. So I think it's really a good loaf of bread for that reason.
I think this is one of the characteristic of Poilâne, that you make this bowl and you don't make here in Paris the famous baguette, no?
Yeah, because it's actually, so when my grandfather started in the 1930s, France was experiencing one of its largest numbers of people living in the city, and there was a bakery at every street corner, if not in a block. And bakers, for various reasons, started making whiter breads, smaller formats. It catered to any number of impediments they had, whether it was liberating the price of bread or satisfying this utopia for people that white bread means a richer bread. It's more refined. Yes. And it is more refined, but more refined means it has less nutrients inside of it because it's whiter flour. And so what it is, my grandfather said, no, I'm going to do the bread that I knew in the countryside in Normandy. And that for him was something that he took as an identifier, and it has stuck as our signature.
Yeah, so he wanted to be the more characteristic bread, not like a baguette like everyone did. He wanted to be alone.
Yes, and also it was a bread that had fed centuries of French people. The type of bread we make is a bread that across Europe was the standard.
Okay, and it's all done with one flour, right? It's just one flour, which is wheat flour,
and it's type 80. So in the spectrum, we use a wheat flour, and solidly wheat flour that is stone ground, which allows to keep for the natural oils in the grain, and means we don't need to add any adjuvants to the dough. And then we create the loaf from there with our sourdough, the salt, and the water.
I'm talking about sourdough.
Yes.
I've heard that you use some part of the dough from the day before, right?
So even the batch before. So every time we create a new batch, we set a little piece of the dough aside, and that dough will become the sourdough of the next
batch. And this comes from long ago.
A while ago. It's been 91 years.
91 years.
Grandfather started in 1932. And at every batch, we just put it all back so that we can create the next batch. So we use the word sourdough nowadays has been used a little bit to represent a category of breads, but it's actually a technique. And a sourdough can encompass many realities. I mean, there's many ways. You have liquid sourdoughs, hard sourdoughs. You have different ways in which we work on the sourdough. So it's really interesting when a baker tells you, I make a sourdough bread, to scratch further than the surface and understand how do they create their sourdough, because they're usually great stories about what's behind it.
Which is your favorite type of sourdough?
My favorite? I have many sourdoughs. Everywhere I travel, I always travel with my sourdough everywhere because I like to bake.
Does it have its own passport?
Yeah, its own passport.
Which nationality?
No, but I when I travel somewhere, maybe when I go on vacations, I try to make a sourdough wherever I go because it's fun.
Yeah.
So the last one I did was in Brazil. I started with tropical fruits.
Yep.
But the one that I love the most maybe is the one that I did in Ushuaia at the end of the world.
Wow.
And I started with whole wheat from La Patagonia.
Yeah.
And also water that was snow. I melted snow and started.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was incredible. At the end of the world.
That's such a great adventure.
Yeah, so I like to do that. Sometimes I go to rivers in the mountains with fresh mineral water.
Yeah.
Have you ever imagined doing for example, an extraordinary sourdough starter from something
all over the place? Yeah. So not really, because by the time I would bring it back to Paris, it would change its nature. But from travels I have done, I appreciate how the local sourdoughs have their distinctive flavors related to the terrain and also just the air around it. And how I met a baker in Neymar that makes European style breads, and it was funny to see how he used all of the local ingredients and found his balances or his equilibria so as to create these beautiful breads using only local ingredients and adapting to the weather.
Local. Yeah, many. We know maybe a baker from Barcelona, well known in Spain, which is Jordi Morera.
Yeah.
He also bakes with local ingredients, and he has the huge relationship with the people.
Saw the grain?
Yeah, so the grain, and it's a whole community, and they help each other because he buys them the grains, and then he mills them, and it works perfectly. So that's interesting.
It's really interesting, and that's something, what you're touching base on is very interesting, because when my grandfather started, because he was not doing like everyone else, it gave him the opportunity to have conversations that no one else was having. And more specifically, developing a special relationship between the bakers, the millers, the growers, and therefore now bringing that conversation to what is the quality of the soil we're sowing the grains in. And so that, what we call in French cahier des charges, have defined practices in that community of people, because what's beautiful with bread is we're expliciting the value chain between the field and your plate. And we're producing in the middle of a city something that really reminds you how close we are to an agricultural society.
And speaking about your grandfather, who came up with the idea of doing the P in the bread?
So the P signature, the scoring on our breads, was my father's work. He wanted to do a wink, a nod to the tradition of signing your breads to distinguish it from your neighbors in a communal oven. And these loaves at Poilâne until then bared a dash sign, and then harbored a P for pain, which means bread, and Poilâne.
So interesting, because that's something new in the Poilâne story, right?
Yes, it's only 23 years
and the baker is almost 100 years, not yet, but almost. So it's something new.
Yes, it is.
Interesting. And how you became a baker?
So I became a baker because we had a school holiday.
And you had a bakery.
And I had a bakery. So I had always told my parents that I wanted to take over the family business. And when I was 16,
really young.
I mean, well, not that young, but my father was an apprentice when he was 14.
Oh.
But for my period, for my age, it was on the younger side. My mom said, look, if you're serious about taking over your family's business at some point, you need to be learning your craft. So she put me during a school holiday in the bakehouse, and I started baking bread with my master of apprenticeship.
Which was the first bread that you made?
That I made. So I made the wheat sourdough bread down here at 8 Rue du Cherche Midi. We're in the heart of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. It was many moons ago, but at this time of the year. And it was an extraordinary experience because at first you have a hard time shaping with your smaller hands these loaves. And then once you manage to create the loaf, then you realize it's like giving breath to a piece of bread. It's incredible in terms of the satisfaction, in terms of the experience, in terms of, everything.
So you fell in love immediately.
I think, so what's interesting is that for me, it wasn't about falling in love. It was about nurturing the obviousness of it. And what I find, and it's been over 20 years now that I've taken over my parents' footsteps, something that I find very exciting to me is the idea that baking breads, working in the bakery, meeting you, what I realize is that my job really connects me to the world in some very unique ways. And I love that I actually I only have one line on my CV, which is Poilâne Bakery. I mean, I did work in a few other little places here and there, but mainly I have one line on my CV, but I don't have the feeling that I've done only one job. I feel like I've done a million different jobs. And what I love is the meeting and the learning from it.
And you could do anything here at the bakery, from baking or administration, whatever.
Yep.
And you started really young, because from one day to another, you...
Yeah. I was 18 when my parents passed away, and that's how I came to take over the family business. And luckily, I was taking a year off before I went to college, so in the US, and that helped me. The timing worked out nicely for that. It allowed me to take care of the taking over the family business, and then the rest.
That was a huge change in your life of food.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But you did it
for one day.
perfectly.
Well, I did it with heart, passion, and in the sense of obviousness that this was my place.
Is it true that Poilâne was the first bakery that sent bread from Paris to New York in the 1960s?
That is very possible that we were among the first.
In a Concorde.
In a Concorde.
Oh.
I know that my bread has flown on the Concorde because it was on the menu.
It was in the main.
What was a Concorde first, for the ones who don't say?
Yes, for those who didn't grow up with that plane, which is a lot of people if you live outside of France. So the Concorde is an Airbus plane that was supersonic, and that was very famous because British Airways and Air France had this plane and did typically London or Paris to New York. And
it was really fast.
Super fast. It was like a 6-hour flight was 4 hours.
It flew at 2,000 kilometers per hour.
Okay, you know more than me.
That's the double of the speed of the sound.
Oh wow, yeah. So I didn't realize it was that fast, but I know that, or I did, just in terms of distances and things. But our bread was on the menu of the catering, and I think my parents. My mom was American, my father was French. They loved when they traveled to bring the bread with them to show. My father would love to show his craft and share it. And so that we started retailing across the world as soon as we were able to ship via containers to different places in the world.
And how do you ship this bread? It wasn't frozen, right?
No, it wasn't frozen. It was fresh because our bread keeps for about 4 to 6 days. I mean, you can keep it longer, but we want our freshest experience possible when we sell our bread. So we ship it, and that bread eventually comes within 24 to 48 hours maximum.
Now this year you're still doing that, but now the Concorde,
there's no Concorde anymore. We have different couriers that aggregate our breads and other goods, and they get shipped overnight and
all around the world. You can send it
all around the world
in 24 hours.
Within 24 hours. It's not true for every destination. It really depends on what is the destination and the rules. But our bread keeps well, and so for places that have harder access to quality bread, it's actually a really nice offering.
Mm-hmm. And what about the strangest country that ever bought your bread?
That is a very good question. I'm not really sure, but I know that my bread has been east to west, north and south of Paris to the extremes. And knowing that, whether it was by a shipment or in the suitcase of different travelers, I have a lot of pride in that. And so maybe the next destination is to send the bread on orbit, or maybe to the moon, or who knows, to Mars.
We have some contacts.
Is it true that Frank Sinatra ordered the bread from whichever part of the world he was?
So we have had many famous customers, celebrities that have ordered the bread. They include Mr. Sinatra, and it's very touching to see when people like our breads, the stories that they carry with it, whether it reminds them of something, or whether they're so attached to the loaf that they have it shipped wherever they are in the world, because either because they're challenged by the local offer or because just they love our breads. I have friends who come and who take an extra suitcase so that they can fill it up with bread on their way back.
Wow. So you only ship this one, or you ship...
So we ship everything, bread-wise, except, bread-wise. We don't ship croissants because for obvious reasons, that would not wind up so well.
I understand.
And
Good.
how do you manage to control the quality of the bread in other parts of the world apart from France?
So what we will do is a lot of the people who order it, and this is not a big proportion of our business, we can ship around the world, but the bulk of our customers are actually, first and foremost, the local Parisians that comes to our stores, and then our customers that across Paris and its surroundings order our bread. And the same is true for London, where we've been since 2000, where we have both a shop and a retailer's network of restaurants and retailers who sell our bread. So first and foremost, we cater to those clients. And then beyond that perimeter, the people who will order our bread are usually connoisseurs that know how to compensate for the effect of air that dries out the loaf, or the humidity of the air that makes it tend to mold. So voila.
And talking about the heart of the bakery, which is the oven,
Yep.
talk us about...
Yeah, so should I walk you through the different stages of baking bread at Poilâne?
Yes, okay.
Because I think that something that sets us apart is that in our bakehouses, a single baker is in charge of their production from start to finish. And that is important for a sense of responsibility, but also ownership of what they do. So it means that our bakers can have, in some sense, it's their production, and so they feel the responsibility of keeping the standard. Now, we first have the sourdough, so the piece of dough from one batch that we carry on to the following batch. We add the wheat flour or the rye flour, we also make, and we have a different starter for that one, a corn bread. We have salt, water, and with these 4 ingredients, we have the dough. Then we let the dough rise a first time in these big boxes that look like big barrels, open barrels of wood, in which the dough rises, and the fermentation is fostered by the environment and by batches and batches of bread, one after the next. Then we'll cut out the weight and volume of bread. We'll check that we're within the right range with this old Roman balance, and it's not about the precision, it's just about checking that we're within the right range. We shape the loaf, we cradle it into these wicker baskets that are covered in linen, les bannetons, and then we let it rise a second time until we overturn the banneton onto the peel, score the pea, and bake the bread. And most people think that the bread process is over, but actually what happens is that once you take out the bread from the oven, then we need to let it rest. And le chant du pain, the song, the crackling of the breads, is actually the ultimate stage of bread baking, where that allows the bread to rest, lose a little bit of water, and so you finish off the bake where it ensures that the bread is thoroughly cooked and cooled off enough that you can touch it with your hands.
And you repeat this here at the bakery, and there's this
at the manufacturer as well. So in all of our stores, in all of our bake houses,
even in London,
where we produce on premise, the process is the same. So whether it's in our bakeries in Paris or London, or in our manufacturer where we have 24 ovens, one next to the other, we use the same methodology, which puts an accent on using our 5 senses to adjust and fine-tune. And it's not about the feeling, it's about the understanding of what are the sensory cues that we're getting, what, if I'm not mistaken, what you would call, Ramon,
to read the dough.
Thank you. So the reading of the dough, and I think your words are really powerful because they really capture the essence of what's going on. It's not about the feeling in a funny way. It's about actually, this is an alphabet, like coding or like a language. And so throughout 9 months of our bakers training, what we do is we teach our bakers to fine-tune the ABCs of their language, and then use more words develop their sophistication of their language through practice.
Yes, and then the interesting that you have to repeat this every day.
Yes.
Because
And several
maybe
times a
baking
day.
one piece of bread is easy, but then when you have to do this every day, and I don't know how many loaves you bake a day. It's maybe a lot. No, I think so.
Yeah, so we will bake anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 loaves.
Sorry?
2,000 and 3,000 loaves every day.
Sorry.
2,000 and 3,000. Mark it down. But, it depends. What's remarkable is that we do the equivalent of that with our big sourdough loaves and all of the other breads we do. But if you do in 2,000 or 3,000 croissants, that sounds like a lot, but it's not as big of a volume. The point I'm trying to make is that the beauty of the way we work is that we are able to scale the production without compromising on the way. So in the late 70s, my father's, there was more and more demand for our bread. And the classic route or crossroads at which my father was either he industrialized his production and created a production line, or he created a place like he did at the manufacture. And that's why he used the word manufacture, which reflects the use of our human hands as the most sophisticated tool. And the idea was that though each baker has their own bakehouse, their own fournil, and they produce from start to finish their baked goods, all of our breads. And that allows to respond to demand for restaurants and wholesalers, but without compromising on the quality. So in other words, whereas most people would have chosen a production line, what my father did was made the choice of valorizing our human hands into 24 ovens or bakehouses or bakeries, in some ways, to make the same quality bread in any of our stores or at the manufacturer's bakehouses on a daily basis.
So you travel a lot, so you have to go and check all the ovens, what they're doing, I think so. Oh, yeah.
I love to meet my teams, and I love to share moments where we can check together on the quality of the breads, on what has been accomplished, or what were the difficulties, because of course it's not an easy peasy job, it's not repetitive. Like from one day to the next.
How many people work in Poilâne around the world?
Between France and the UK, there's 140 of us.
And as you said, every piece is slightly different than the other because it depends on each baker, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
and the P, it's not the same.
P as well. So we strive to do something that is in the same, that hits the same volume, the same work. We strive that our bakers have a constance in the quality of their bake. But the reality is that from one day to the next, there's subtle differences, because to have a similar, a constant final quality, you have to constantly adjust.
Mm-hmm. The weather is...
the weather, of course, but also the season.
The season too, yeah.
A baker will know that the wheat is ready to be harvested in the bakehouse, even though there isn't a field particularly close from Paris, but because it influences the way the dough rises. It's in the air.
Are you lost with all the sourdough bread recipes that you find on the internet? Would you like to learn all the tips and tricks to make your own sourdough bread at home? Then I have the solution. I have designed the perfect masterclass of sourdough bread just made for you. By clicking the link on the description, you will learn how to make and take care of your sourdough starter, how to knead, shape, ferment, and bake your sourdough bread, how to use and read the baker's percentage, all the basic techniques to bake like a pro at home, and how to read and understand your dough. Don't miss out on it and click the link on the description right now.
Did Dali collaborate with your father painting a bread made by him?
Yes. So in the 1960s, the late 1960s, my father met Salvador Dali, and they started collaborating to do some simple objects at first. But in 1971, when Dali was living in Le Meurice, he wanted to surprise his partner, Gala, by creating a whole bedroom made out of bread, which was a bed, a closet, a chandelier, a bedside. I mean, we had it all.
A cell phone.
Cell phone, not yet. Not yet. I mean, like, we're trying, but this was the 70s, the 71.
How do you make a bed made of bread?
So you create a frame and you create a little bit like a woodsmith. You create different panels that you bring together to construct the piece.
And how does this object last?
So an object made out of bread can last many, many years. I've kept a piece 14 years so far intact, but there's a reality to that piece of bread dough baked to be sensitive to the weather and the environment around. So if it's dry and humid, or if it's hot or cold, the dough reacts in a different way, and so you might need to compensate.
Maybe it depends on how hungry you are. So sometimes you can.
Yes,
I'll take a little bit of this and
has been trying to steal a piece of my chandelier with the butter. We nowadays, to compensate for the extreme variations of weather in the summer, we varnish it to keep it a little longer. Not so tasty. I'm just saying, in case you wanted to take a slice on your way out.
Which was your favorite object made of bread by your father?
I think one of my favorite object made out of bread by my father was a bird cage.
Bird cage? Oof,
yes, because complicated, but
cuisines, no?
Well, yes, in that style. But what's beautiful is that bird basically sets its way out to freedom by eating its cage. So it's very beautiful and poetic. And this was a work that my father did, inspired by Man Ray. And I think that that's something that I'm very proud of him for have done that. Yeah.
And you? You're an artist, of course.
I love to create objects made out of bread because I find that it's a beautiful medium. I have done it for friends. I've done it with some colleagues for different commissions that we've received. And it's something that I enjoy doing as well.
The strangest thing?
The strangest thing. Oh, goodness.
And I had to ask that.
I think, sometimes people ask, we've been, it's a tough question, but I think, we've, the strange, it's not something that I've been asked for, but what's interesting with bread is that it is a medium that, depending on where you are in the world, can represent something creative, masterful, or represent a very harsh reality of you have nothing else to work with from. And so I was reminded of that recently because we just recreated the third edition of 2 pieces of that exhibit of the bedroom made out of bread that my father did for Salvador Dali. So we were commissioned recently to redo the cabinet and the chandelier for the 3rd time. And in doing so, a friend of mine who saw the exhibits in which it's on view in La Conciergerie on l'île de la Cité until mid-July, there is a friend of hers who was explaining to her that whereas in the Western world, we think that's a creative use of the medium, and we also might have, especially in France, the experience of pâte à sel, which is a salted dough that you bake. For some Eastern Europeans, it actually represents the fact that you had nothing else to use as a medium to create something. So it's an interesting paradox.
Which was your best artistic bread?
Artistic
object?
Well, it had the shape of a bread.
If you could create an AI tool for your bakery that may help you, which would be this tool?
I think that what would be amazing is there is such a complexity of indicators when you're baking bread that our human hands are able to encompass. I would like artificial intelligence to be able to synthesize that, because I think that will be an incredible mathematical challenge to bring that together.
And talking about that, how do you see the future of Poilâne?
Well, my daily bread is to bake different breads using different grains, creating different cookies or pastries to feed my local community, and beyond that, to inspire people to get their hands dirty in breads, to taste their local bread, to stop by my bakery if they're in Paris or London, because I want to be able to share that bread is an incredible food for both the body and mind.
And so you've been doing classes, or you did a master class
Exactly.
in video, but do you do classes by person?
Yeah, so we've been throughout the years, I realize, and more as our societies become, as our technologies develop, to balance it out, I've noticed that people feel a need to also just get their hands into something tangible. And bread baking is an incredible tool for that.
Good. Online classes?
Online classes. I have a class on the Masterclass platform on how to bake bread. But I've also had incredible exchanges or meetings on various shows and opportunities of speaking for different.
Have you felt like a change in mind in the people across the world by tasting new types of bread? And
I think I found something to be constant is no matter how remote someone is from bread baking, and people are not indifferent to bread. And I think that it's no surprise that at the onset of the pandemic in April 2020, bread was one of the top research on Google. And I think it really says that it really is the basis. And I'm always surprised to see how everything relates to bread.
Because it was in French it sounds good, although in Spanish it's a pandemia.
Yeah.
And French is pain de mie.
Yeah.
So
it actually sounds like when you're saying it sounds like pain de mie. But it could also be un pain de mie.
Okay, but it was about bread.
Exactly.
So that helped a lot. I wanted to tell me a little bit more about your oven, which is kind of interesting, the steam method that you have there, and about how you work with that oven, which is not easy.
So we use a wood-fired oven, and you're right, it's not easy. It's not a switch on and switch off oven, and we don't just leave it on and hope for it to remain at the same heat. It's actually an oven that we bring to a certain heat by fueling it with wood fire. It spits inside of the oven, and we direct.
Does it become
over 250 degrees? And we warm it up so that it gets to the right temperature, and these bricks soak up the heat. And then as soon as they stop being heated, they'll release the heat and bake whatever's in there.
And you keep it heat since your grandfather, right?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
But there's been a bakery at 8 Rue du Cherche-Midi since the French Revolution. So it's very possible that beyond my grandfather, there was already generations of bakers that were there.
And tell me about the steam method that you use. Is interesting too.
One of the ways we get the steam from the bread is because we put this cast iron device at the entrance of the oven to direct the flame when we're heating the oven. When we remove it, there's a hole. And that hole, we have a little bucket that we fill up with water, and that gives the steam to the oven.
Interesting. I've never seen that.
And that gives it extra shine.
I always see like a can or something inside the oven. This method, it's really old and interesting.
Yes, I agree.
What do you recommend to a person who's starting in the bakery?
I would say do not be discouraged and just try. And more likely than not, your first attempts won't turn out the way you want it, and that's okay. Because first of all, it's much harder to bake at home a single loaf than to bake a batch. The batch is more resilient, but also because it is a tough craft and it takes many, many moons to capture the essence, to capture the habit. And I think that it's in that way, it's ingracious. So just bear it in mind so that when you feel discouraged, pick yourself up and try it again.
And which kind of loaf should they have in this imaginary bakery? A lot or just a few? I
would start by baking. You can start by baking just smaller loaves, but it doesn't. I think I would just still do a one big batch. Use a cocotte to bake it inside of your oven to have that extra heat and the height and the rising of the loaf in the oven. So yeah.
And one last question: are you a slice person or a pull apart person?
So it's a very interesting question. So our big sourdough loaves, and in fact, most of our breads at Poilâne don't really lend themselves to the pulling apart because aside from the brioche that you can, the others
It's hard.
are harder. But I will say that even when I cut bread, it's always in the spirit of pulling it.
Good. Well, good answer. So the last thing that we ask all our guests.
You're losing your French.
Is to give them an easy recipe, bread recipe if you want. But you can give a crepe recipe now, whatever you want, to this camera in a minute.
In a minute?
Like a TikToker.
Okay. So
go.
So easy recipe to bake bread. Take 2 types of bread, slice it, and get 3 slices. 2 slices of one style, 1 slice of the other one. And then you toast the 2 on the outside, putting 2 slices in 1 slot. And the 3rd slice, you either toast on both sides or just leave it as is. Salted butter on one side, unsalted butter on the other side, and then create a sandwich. Voila.
Yes, the bread sandwich.
1 minute?
Yeah, perfect. Wow. Can we do that now?
You can do it now.
Well, okay. We're done.
You have a minute.
Well, thank you, Apollonia, for having us here at your kitchen.
Yes, this is my kitchen and test
The
kitchen.
secret kitchen.
The secret kitchen.
You won't tell.
The hidden kitchen.
Yeah, where are we?
We're between 2 buildings. It's our platform 3/4.
What was your last
3/4.
experiment here?
My last experiment here was actually milling grains. I have a mixer and I can add the components to grind the grain, and that was loads of fun because I just took some rice and just grounded it to bake with it. There's something that's loads of fun to do that.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you a lot.
You're
welcome. It was an honor to be here. And well, that's all, no? Something else to say?
Thank you, Apollonia.
Awesome job. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you.